Chapter 20. The other hunters crowded round the young knight who had made the kill, congratulating him and patting his back. Baron Arold started across towards him, but paused beside Tug, looking up to Will as he spoke. "You won't see another that size in a long time, Will," he said gruffly. "Pity he didn't come our way. I would have liked a trophy like that for myself." He continued on his way towards Sir Rodney, who was already with the group of warriors around the dead boar. Consequently, Will found himself, for the first time in some weeks, face to face with Horace. There was an awkward pause, with neither boy willing to make the first move. Horace, excited by the events of the morning, his heart still pounding with the thrill of fear he'd felt when the boar first appeared, wanted to share the moment with Will. In the light of what they had just seen, their childish squabble seemed unimportant, and now he felt badly about his behaviour on that day 6 weeks ago. But he couldn't find the words to express his feelings, and he saw no encouragement to do so in Will's set features. So with a slight shrug, he started to step past Tug to go and congratulate the young hunter. As he did so, the pony stiffened and pricked his ears, giving a warning neigh. Will looked back at the thicket, and his blood seemed to freeze in his veins. There, standing just outside the shelter of the bushes, was another boar, even larger than the one which now lay dead in the snow. "Look out!" he cried, as the huge beast slashed at the earth with its tusks. It was a bad situation. The line of hunters had broken up, most of them having moved over to marvel at the size of the dead boar and to praise its killer. Only Will and Horace remained in the path of the second boar, mainly, Will realized, because Horace had hesitated for those few vital seconds. Horace spun round at Will's shout. He looked at Will, then swung to look at the new danger. The boar lowered its head, tore at the ground again, and charged. It all happened with terrifying speed. One moment, the huge animal was ripping the ground with its tusks. The next, it was hurtling towards them. Placing himself between Will and the boar, Horace turned without hesitation to face it, setting his spear as Sir Rodney and the Baron had showed him. But, as he did so, his foot slipped on an icy patch in the snow, and he sprawled helplessly onto his side, the long spear falling from his grasp. There was not a second to lose. Horace lay helpless before those murderous tusks. Will kicked his feet clear of the stirrups and dropped to the ground, sighting and drawing back the bowstring even as he did so. He knew his small bow would have no chance of stopping the boar's maddened rush. All he could hope to do was distract the maddened animal, to turn it away from the helpless boy on the ground. He fired and instantly ran to one side, away from the fallen apprentice. He yelled at the top of his lungs and fired again. The arrows stuck out of the boar's thick hide like needles in a pincushion. They did it no serious harm, but the pain of them burnt through the animal like a hot knife. Its red, angry eyes fastened on the small, capering figure to one side, and furiously it swung after Will. There was no time to fire again. Horace was safe for the moment. Now Will himself was in danger. He sprinted for the shelter of a tree and ducked behind it, just in time. The boar's enraged charge carried it straight into the trunk of the tree. Its huge body crashed against the trunk, shaking it to its roots, sending showers of snow cascading out of its upper branches. Amazingly, the boar seemed unaffected by the crash. It backed up a few paces and charged at Will again. The boy darted around the tree trunk again, narrowly avoiding the slashing tusks as the boar thundered by. Screaming in fury, the huge animal spun in its tracks, skidding in the snow, and came at him again. This time it came more slowly, giving Will no chance to dart to one side at the last moment. The boar came at a trot, fury in its red eyes, tusks slashing from side to side, its hot breath steaming in the freezing winter air. Behind him, Will could hear the shouts of the hunters, but he knew they'd arrived too late to help him. He nocked another arrow, knowing that he had no chance of hitting a vital spot as the pig came at him head-on. Then there was a thud of muffled hooves on the snow, and a small, shaggy shape was driving towards the furious monster. "No, Tug!" Will screamed, in an agony of fear for his horse. But the pony charged at the huge boar, spinning in his tracks and lashing out with his rear hooves as he came within range. Tug's rear hooves caught the pig in the ribs and, with all the force of a pony's upper legs behind it, sent the boar rolling sideways in the snow. The boar was up in an instant, even more furious than before. The pony had caught him off balance, but the kick had done no serious damage. Now, the boar slashed and cut at Tug as the little pony neighed in fear and danced sideways out of the reach of those razor-sharp tusks. "Tug, get clear!" Will screamed again. His heart was in his throat. If those tusks caught the vulnerable tendons in the horse's lower legs, Tug would be crippled for life. He couldn't stand by and watch his horse put himself in such peril for his master. He drew and fired again, and, dragging the long ranger knife from his belt, charged across the snow at the huge, furious beast. The third arrow struck the pig in the side. Again, he had missed a vulnerable spot and only wounded the monster. He yelled at it as he ran, screaming for Tug to get clear. The boar saw him coming, recognizing the small figure that had first driven it to such fury. Its red, hate-filled eyes fastened upon him, and its head lowered for a final killing charge. Will saw the muscles bunch in the massive hind quarters. He was too far from cover to run. He'd have to face the charge here in the open. He dropped to one knee and, hopelessly, held out the keen-bladed ranger knife in front of him as the boar charged. Dimly, he heard Horace's hoarse cry as the apprentice warrior charged forward to help him, his spear at the ready. Then a deep, whistling hiss cut across the sound of the boar's hooves, followed by a solid, meaty smack. The boar reared up in mid-stride, twisting in sudden agony, and fell, dead as a stone, in the snow. Holt's long, heavy-shafted arrow was almost buried in its side, driven there by the full power of the ranger's mighty longbow. He'd struck the charging monster right behind the left shoulder, driving the head of the arrow into and through the pig's massive heart. A perfect shot. Holt reined in Abelard in a shower of snow and hurled himself to the ground, throwing his arms around the shaking boy. Will, overcome with relief, buried his face into the rough cloth of the ranger's cloak. He didn't want anyone to see the tears that were streaming down his face. Gently, Holt took the knife from Will's hand. "What on earth were you hoping to do with this?" he asked. Will simply shook his head. He couldn't speak. He felt Tug's soft muzzle butting gently against him and looked up into the big, intelligent eyes. Then it was all noise and confusion as the hunters gathered around, marveling at the size of the second boar and slapping Will on the back for his courage. He stood among them, a small figure, ashamed still of the tears that slid down his cheeks, no matter how hard he tried to stop them. "They're cunning brutes," said Sir Rodney, nudging the dead boar with his foot. "We all assumed there was only one because they never left the lair together." Will felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to find he was looking into Horace's eyes, and the apprentice warrior was shaking his head slowly in admiration and disbelief. "You saved my life," he said. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen." Will tried to shrug the other boy's thanks aside, but Horace pressed on. He remembered all the times in the past when he'd teased Will, when he'd bullied him. Now, acting instinctively, the smaller boy had saved him from those murderous, slashing tusks. It said something for Horace's growing maturity that he had forgotten his own instinctive action, when he had placed himself between the charging boar and the apprentice ranger. "But why, Will? After all, we—" He couldn't bring himself to finish the statement, but Will somehow knew what was in his mind. "Horace, we may have fought in the past," he said, "but I don't hate you. I never hated you." Horace nodded once, a look of understanding coming over his face. Then he seemed to come to a decision. "I owe you my life, Will," he said in a determined voice. "I'll never forget that debt. If you ever need a friend, if you ever need help, you can call on me." The two boys faced each other for a moment, then Horace thrust out his hand and Will took it. The circle of knights around them was silent, witnessing, but not wanting to interrupt, this important moment for the two boys. Then Baron Arold stepped forward and put his arms around them both, one either side of him. "Well said, both of you," he said heartily, and the knights chorused their assent. The Baron grinned delightedly. It had been a perfect morning, all told. A bit of excitement. 2 huge boars killed. And now 2 of his wards forging a sort of special bond that only came from shared danger. "We've got 2 fine young men here," he said to the group at large, and again there was that hearty chorus of assent. "Holt, Rodney, you can both be proud of your apprentices." "Indeed we are, my lord," Sir Rodney replied. He nodded approvingly at Horace. He'd seen the way the boy had turned without hesitation to face the charge, and he approved of Horace's open offer of friendship to Will. He remembered all too well seeing them fighting on Harvest Day. It seemed such childish squabbles were behind them now, and he felt a deep satisfaction that he had chosen Horace for battle school. Holt, for his part, said nothing, but when Will turned to look at his mentor, the grizzled ranger met his eye and simply nodded. And that, Will knew, was the equivalent of 3 hearty cheers from Holt.